Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello. I thought we'd start with something fun.
Hello.
Hi, Keely. Hi, Ezra. Yita. Hello, Erica. How was your week?
Good.
Yay.
How about yours?
Hey, Mo. Hello, Mohammed. Fine week. How was the reading this time? We read some serious academic articles. My week was good. I've mostly been preparing. I have, in the summer this time, I have a couple of yoga classes that are distance. So I've been doing stuff for them, but most of this week I spent prepping your next week. So I'm trying to keep it separate in my mind. I'm like, wait, is that this week or next week?
That sounds like a struggle.
Mo, which tests was it? I assume you mean the elements part. Yes, a lot, complicated, so true. That's why we're here to talk about it. Yes. So Mo was asking about one of the tests. I'm assuming you're meaning the elements of dance one. Oh, there was a funny. Oh, yes. Okay. So the way to tell. Hold on, let me see if I have a visual for this. The question is, how do you tell whether on a quiz it's a single choice or a multiple choice? And it isn't very obvious, I agree, but there's either a bubble or a square. So I think it's if there's a bubble, then you choose one of the bubbles, and if it's a square, then you can check a bunch of the check boxes. And I think I have a visual of that hanging out on my desktop here, so let me see real quick. Boop. Do I? Rubrics. Maybe I don't anymore. Okay, I'll dig that up because it's nice to have a visual for that. So yeah, but I think the thing is that a multiple choice where you just pick one, there's a bubble and the other ones are squares. So I don't like the way that this particular thing works. Mo's asking about partial credit on the multiple choice check boxes. Yeah, I'd love to see your faces. I miss you guys. Yes, please, cameras. So on the checkbox questions where there's more than one answer, if you check a box that is incorrect, it takes points off. So if you're taking the quiz and you like the first time around you pick, A, B, and C, but the second time around you pick B, C, and D, like your answer total might come across as the same because the correct answers are canceling out the points you earned from the incorrect answers. And I think that's silly, but it's not something that the teachers can control within the system. It's just default. Yeah. Indeed. Not the answer you were hoping for, probably. Give myself whoa, that's too bright. Okay, so I think that I'm gonna turn on a little bit more light in here for you guys. I think that there is a poll that's an anonymous poll. So I thought we would start today with launch poll. Mm-hmm. So can you guys fill out this poll to get us started? And I'll try and get a little more light in here. Is that a bit better? Seems pretty good. I haven't used this poll before, this poll thingamajig, so if you see something that's broken, don't be shy about telling me. I was like, oh, polls, I should try that. Am I looking forward to doing anything this weekend? What am I looking forward to? I really want to go to the beach. I don't think I'm going to get to go to the beach unless I try and go this afternoon because the traffic's so bad now. Yeah, go ahead, Mo. I'm reading chats while you guys pull it up.
How far are you from the beach? Are you super close?
I live on Skyline, not up. I'm south of the school by quite a bit, but I'm like in between San Mateo and Half Moon Bay.
Oh, perfect. So not too far out.
No, it's not too far out. But I understand that like everybody's so excited about going to the beach now that like the traffic is just miserable.
It's crazy. Yeah. This weekend we went to Burlingame and there was like, as if there was no like COVID going on. There was people everywhere, super like right next to each other. They're trying to block off the streets from Friday to Sunday. So it's just open for restaurants where they can utilize the streets more.
Uh-huh.
But I don't feel like social distancing was going on whatsoever.
Yikes. Were people wearing masks or?
Yeah, there was people wearing masks for the most part. I mean, you definitely see those one-offs where they're not, and you're like, okay, well, let's walk the other way kind of deal. But it's interesting. It's interesting to see that the weather's getting nicer, things are opening, so people are kind of like,
Yeah. I have family who are not in California, and it's crazy to me. Like,
yeah,
people just aren't wearing masks; they're just out. When we had the long weekend, because we live kind of in the forest, people came up to try and hike, and the parking was blocked off.
Oh, yeah.
So people were like literally driving into our yard to park. It was bizarre. We're like, what's happening?
Yeah, nice weather. Everybody flocks to beaches and like hikes and national parks. It's crazy.
I don't blame them, honestly.
Yeah.
Really, really grateful to have trees. Want to see my trees, guys? Trees.
Oh, okay. So you're pretty nicely.
Yeah, we're not technically in town.
It looks like close to like the Bella Vista or.
Exactly. Good call.
Loved that place. Or the Mountain House.
Mm-hmm.
Also very.
You totally called it.
Perfect. I thought so.
we moved up here and the Bella Vista closed like 3 weeks before we could move in. We were so upset. We're like, no.
It was really, yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, it was really good.
The Mountain House is good. Try that one.
They're doing takeout now.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah, they just started. Okay, so question number 1. I think everybody, yes, we have 9 out of 9. Have you been to a circus before? So we have like 56 folks said yes, and then 22% said a fair, and 22% said nope, not at all. So the next, I should put these in a different order. No, maybe I just didn't put that question in there. So did you guys recognize the group that we were watching as you came in at all? It was Cirque du Soleil. Has anybody seen Cirque du Soleil?
Yeah, not that particular one, but a form of Cirque du Soleil.
Which one did you see?
I believe it was called Volta in Chicago.
That one's totally like those two. The one we were just watching was called Curios, and Volta is my other total favorite.
It was good.
Yeah, really good. Anybody else, have you ever seen Cirque du Soleil? Oh, look at gallery view today. Oh, Mo, you're, is it a cockatiel? It's really cute. So since we're gonna spend a lot of time sort of looking back at where circus arts in America came from, or maybe I should say North America came from, I figured we'd start with something fun and modern, which is that Cirque du Soleil. And that one, Curios, the theme of it is like a steampunk circus, which is pretty awesome. So I thought it was interesting, since we were going to talk about especially the World's Fair in America just a little bit, since Curios and steampunk is roughly imaginatively set in the sort of the same time era, being the turn of the century, like around 1900s. And you can see there were a bunch of dudes in random suits, right? Obviously it's not historically accurate and it's not supposed to be, it's supposed to be a fantasy, but also like the woman in the waist cincture who was helping with the drumming is making reference to that 1900s, like 1890s over into the early 19th century World's Fair time, when circuses previous to that time, they had been like little traveling circuses that would drive around in either trucks or caravans, and there were a series of circuits around the United States. So one of the circuits that we'll talk about even more next week is vaudeville circuit. And a circuit meaning, like, it comes from the word circus, right? And it means that there's a series of stops that you go on tour. So if you're a performing arts group, you might book, you know, the Palace Theater in New York City, which would be like the big whammy, and then you go to like a certain theater that is arranged together with, like they had agreements, theaters did. So they would join an organization, and then you would get part of your shows filled in because there was a greater theater organization that would hire a group to go from New York to Milwaukee to Utah to California and make a circuit around the United States. So where was I about that? So when those ideas of circuits started before we had actual venues for the circuses to be on. So if you were traveling in a caravan with a circus, you would basically like build your stage or build your tent out of the back of your trucks or your caravans. And eventually there became theaters where people would show up and perform. And that was the beginning of the switch over to vaudeville. And one of the other things that happened that was, sorry, I'm laughing at myself because it's hard to breathe because I'm getting enormous down here. Like, I remember when I could just talk. So when we had the first like Chicago World's Fair, for example, they actually like built this whole quote white city. Implications are in effect, right? So they built this imaginary perfect utopian city and filled it with arts and technologies and white Eurocentric things that were happening in America to show off. And it was in response to a World's Fair that had just happened in Paris, and that's how the Eiffel Tower got built, right? Because they were showing off their ability to build a skyscraper. So then our Chicago World's Fair happened, and you have the White City that focuses mostly on technology, so light bulbs are coming out around this time. And then there's the strip of the city that's not in the White City, that's the world part. And that was related to the article that you read about the Chicago World's Fair and also like national identities and colonialism. So there were sort of two parts. One, all the colonialist countries, us included, United States has colonies, we just call them territories. Yeah, we're not doing that. We're totally doing that. So we would basically, on that strip of the world part, they would build little mini vignettes from different nations and populate them, often with Native people, but not necessarily real Native people, because remember, this was the Victorian era, so like the white people didn't know what anyone really looked like, so they would fill in like, oh, you're kind of close enough, nobody's going to notice if you're not actually from that country, we'll just have you stand in. Really appropriate, right? No, totally not appropriate. But we're talking about it because it gets built into how Americans in particular see race and culture, just to be clear. Not because it's okay, because it's not okay. So some of the countries sort of like got excited about this and sent people over and thought that there were sort of two motivations. One motivation is if you are a country being colonized and it's pretty early in your colonization, it might not have been totally horrible yet. And you get this catch-22 where your people are so much poorer than the giant industrialized country that's come in and occupied you, that working with them is really the only way to not end up at the bottom of the barrel. And we see that with people who are coming in to just perform from other countries. And we also see that with Native American performers. So Native American performers were both seen in the World's Fairs, and also they were being taken off the reservations, you know, their native land that we stole, and put on tour doing their war dances. And I say quotes not because they didn't have their own dances, because they definitely had their own authentic dances, but when a circuit, for example, would have a manager or somebody would put this stuff on stage, they would change it so that it has, for example, even like the most innocent of changes, which is that if you're at a powwow, you're probably having people standing all the way around you and your performers are in the center. But if you're going to put that on a stage, then you have the performers up on a stage in front of everybody and all of your audience is here. So whether you might be performing in all directions originally or performing up to the sky, when you're putting it on stage for a probably white audience, you're going to be looking out at them to get their attention, and you're going to change all of your dances to face more forward. So even something that isn't intended to be particularly, you know, meaningful in terms of changing the choreography, changes the choreography for sure and makes it less authentic. Not to mention the fact that you know, dances that Native American people are doing together in their home are probably for their community or as a practice of worship, whereas when you're putting it on stage to make money, you're probably taking the spirituality out of it, and you might or might not do that. There's some really great readings with some of the warriors who were actually at Wounded Knee and then who ended up going on tour and meeting like the Queen of England performing, where they're talking about, instead of feeling like, where they're talking about it as feeling like a real opportunity to share their culture with other people, which is nice to hear because that's not normally what we hear, and I don't think that that's the common experience. But there's some great interviews where he's talking about our assumption, and I think he even said this back to the Queen of England at the time, our assumption that he's somehow being less himself or serving the white people by doing his dance in front of the Queen is in fact an assumption based on white privilege. He's like, I'm doing my thing. Why are you asking me this weird question? Like, aren't you honored that I'm here? And so there's some great readings there, but I know I have too much for you guys to read, so I didn't include that. But I wanted to just frame this dichotomy, taking your community dance into the big scene, because that is going to be, I mean, it's a big part of the circus in this chapter. It's a big part of breakdance, even today, when you think about reality television and competition. Like, are you doing your dance at home in your community with the people who taught you that dance? Or are you going on reality television, which I gotta tell you is not reality. And so that's sort of the theme of this week, is how do you guys think it feels for someone to perform on a stage where they're seen as other? Yeah. And what does it mean? Like, how do we as an audience celebrate something that is new to us and unique without doing this weird thing where you're putting people in a box? And that idea of seeing something that's new and unique and making it separate from us, dealing with that interaction is pretty much what the idea of exoticization is. Does that kind of make sense, that term? It's a little fuzzy. Okay, so let's go back to our fun poll. Have you seen live breakdancing? 11% said on stage, and 56% said in public, at school, at the community. That's awesome. And 33% said no, never. So my question about that is, do you feel like there's a lot of, today, for example, we watched Acrobatics, right? So there were people who are trained in the circus arts who are like bouncing on a giant springy thing, but they're doing movements that are related to movements that we saw the Nicholas brothers doing. And we're gonna, and also, let me not answer this question. Let me ask you guys, can you think of other movements that are similar in certain ways to you guys? Have you seen other forms of dance or martial arts that, like, oh, you know, this kind of looks the same? And there's no, like, I feel like when I ask this question to my dance students even, they're always afraid to say something wrong, and there's no wrong answer here. This is just like connecting the dots by, you could talk about this feels the same, but it seems like the same kind of energy, or it seems like flips are the same, whatever. There's no wrong answers there.
So the question is if we've seen, or like if there's other dances that we think are similar or related to the circus performance that we saw?
Like, yeah, acrobatics or breakdance. Can you think of other styles of dance that have some of those same elements? Think big, broadly. You don't have to be exact.
Would crumping count?
Yes! Totally. Yeah, crumping absolutely counts. What do you think? Can you think of any of the moves that you saw or anything that made you think of that great idea?
No, I was just thinking of a movie that I would like to watch that involves crumping.
Yay! Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Mostly because of really strong torso movements, like the way that you have to contract your torso that I can't do right now.
It's a lot of like head shaking, like arms and everything.
Yes. Yes. Have you seen Rise? I think we had like a little trailer for it.
No.
You might love it. It's a really great movie. It's presented like a documentary, but I think it's sort of in between, like slightly acted, but acted by people who live in the community, one of those things.
Nice.
And it's the film that's about in LA the birth of crumping, which evolved from clowning technique in the hood, and it's awesome. Like, the dancing is just out of this world. So when I was going through all of our videos today, not today, but this week, I thought about crumping and capoeira. has anyone seen capoeira demonstration or like a video of it?
Is it the Brazilian martial arts that?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit.
Yeah. I don't know a lot about it. This was literally like a connection that I was making yesterday where I was like, oh, I need to add that in. Wait, move on. But I was curious about it because I remember, do you remember last week we watched the animation with all the boats coming full of slaves to the New World and how most of the slaves went to like Brazil and South America. And it made me wonder about the history of capoeira, which is a fusion basically of martial arts and dance. And it made me curious about how some of those really similar, big, super athletic, fierce moves might also trace back, like the idea of capoeira, which has flips and really low lunges and side-to-side movement being related from pre-middle passage movement. Was my fun thought of yesterday. But there's also other traditions, and we're not going to go really into those too, but I just want to throw it out there. There's also Chinese acrobatics. There's also Russian acrobatics. There's also, if you think about gymnastics in general, which we normally think of as coming from Russia, and also like into Romania and Germany, there are many, many, many traditions. Oh, somebody's got a hand up. There's many traditions that have acrobatic training, and it usually comes from a martial background. So the movements are one chunk of that, but the other chunk of that is the idea of sort of sparring as a competition, right? Which we still see in breakdance competitions today. So when you have a martial training, you're trying to get your warriors as fit as possible and as capable as possible of kicking some booty. And then within that training, it's pretty common around the world for people to gather around and for two warriors to demonstrate by battling against each other. And we still see that element both in capoeira, but also in like millennial breakdance competitions, right? There's a bunch of people around, they might be cheering everybody on, but then you have the two people who are trading off their skill sets, either showing them off or like battling with each other directly. Yeah, we even still use the word battle. So let me think. I'm coming back to the poll here. The next question I have is, do you use the word cool? I figured it was
yeah,
asking.
for sure. For sure.
Yeah. A lot, yay.
Who doesn't?
I mean, it just occurred to me that it's such a, like, of course you could say the water is cool. Like, we'd all like to have a nice, cool pool to go get into.
Oh, I say hella cool.
Yay. Hella, that means you're Californian. So I just wanted to check in because sometimes slang words get really passe. And certainly we read that 1977, was it 77? I might be wrong about the year, but the Thompson article on the aesthetic of cool. So that was a deep one. Do we have any like, what the heck responses about that? Do you guys feel like it was totally confusing? Do we get the link? Kind of?
It reminded me a bit of like the practice of Stoicism, where it's basically like that mask of coolness, where it's really just about like maintaining control and projecting that. And so it was interesting to see that connection because I never really knew that it existed in African culture.
Right, that's how I felt too. I thought that article was particularly interesting because it compared sort of white Eurocentric Stoicism, which is really restrained and it's about control, to the African tradition, which is about like first of all, it's not just when things are hard. It's also when things are pleasurable or fun or funny, which I think makes it quite unique, right? And also that it's the idea that like a white Eurocentric approach is about controlling everything in the most effective way, getting it like into straight lines and as in sync as possible. When we're talking about dance, especially, if you think about like traditional ballet, everything is about lifting up that torso and being as clear and exact as possible. Ow. Getting klutzy, guys. And the idea of coolness as an aesthetic from the African culture has to do with, even though you might be feeling passionate, you're putting a temper on the top of it to demonstrate that you're doing it on purpose. Whereas like if things are just really awful and I don't know why I always think of Game of Thrones when I'm describing this, but like if you're in Game of Thrones and you're like marching through the ice and you're just miserable and there's zombies coming, like you're cool, but it's because you're exhausted. And that's a different approach entirely, right? Did you guys, in reading that article, did you start to think about the difference between how you interpret sort of mannerisms at all? Like I started to think about what's the difference between, I wonder if I can come up with a modern example. What's the difference between like a snobby white person in an 80s movie in a suit being cool, which I would say is more like being cold, than a person who is maybe not the loudest person in the room and not the biggest movement person in the room, and yet demands sort of a respect that implies that they could be. Does that difference make sense to everybody? I guess that's the point that I wanted to make sure everyone got out of that, is do you understand the difference between the Eurocentric definition of coldness or coolness versus the Africanist version?
A little bit, but it's also kind of hard to explain. Like, I feel like I understand the Eurocentric version more just because that's what I'm more used to. Where it's like, I understand that cool in that sense is having a bit more of like that snobbish, like a little bit more removed approach. And then with the African version, I don't understand as well, where they described it as like a mask of coolness. And I had a bit of a hard time differentiating that, but like I don't know, like the vibes are different. Like,
yeah, the vibes I think are exactly what we're talking about. Is the other thing when I read this, because I read this article for a grad class on dance history that I took a while back, and the experience that I had with it was to realize how that sense of coolness is part of my bias when I meet people. So if I meet someone who is being cool in either way, my impression coming from a white Eurocentric background is to assume that they're kind of icy and cold, because that's what I have more experience with, as opposed to seeing it as like an example of being more refined in your behavior, for example. And I noticed that sometimes, especially with young women who are wearing the mask of coolness, sometimes we interpret that as them being either cold or defensive, in just because of our own personal bias. And so that's sort of a way that this article was talking about art and lets us look at art in a different way, but also is a moment for us to examine sort of our own biases. Like, who would have considered that was a bias to dig into? But it really was for me, because it made me think again, like, do I interpret this differently because of my experience, where if someone is being cool, I might interpret it as standoffish, when really it's about expressing a form of elegance and self-mastery. I don't know, what do you guys think? Agree, disagree? Never felt that way? Feel that way all the time?
I like how you said icy and cold. I like how you were yeah, that was nice.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I think it definitely depends on background, but there is times I'm very much an extrovert. So if I'm in a group of people where they're quote unquote the conversation isn't flowing as I think it should, I can see that person as being cool but cold and very standoffish, and maybe personalities don't clash. Instead of taking a step back and be like, well, maybe it's actually just how they're kind of focused on themselves, kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah. Thanks. If you're also an extrovert, then we're going to get to the extrovert category coming up.
I'm a huge extrovert.
Yay!
I have to be. I work at the airport.
Oh my gosh, you meet so many people.
I'm here right now.
Yay! Hello, airport.
It's empty.
I was gonna say, hopefully it's a little empty.
No, it's okay. If I could show my face, I would, but I have a mask on, so I look kind of weird in the background of the airport.
That's kind of awesome. Sign of the times.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple more questions about. I'm sorry. Did I interrupt somebody? No, we're good. Okay. So we're not going to go far down this tangent, but I just wanted to ask you guys two questions, which I did in the poll, which is, have you ever heard of a circus freak, the term circus freak, or seen a freak show? And it looks like it's kind of an exciting response, because I think there was a big circus trend in the 1990s and 2000s. And so it's exciting to me to see that's not going on right now. So it looks like more than half of you have heard the term circus freak, which is an old term, and it's a reclaimed term. So just like the term gay used to be an offensive term if you were referring to homosexuals, but then the LGBTQ community retook that term back, and now it's a positive word again. For the most part, you can of course use it in a bad way, which you wouldn't. The same is true of a circus freak. And then my next question was, have you seen a circus freak show? Everybody said no. So in the 1800s, I'm sure before, and continuing on through the 1900s, a circus freak would be a person who may or may not have authentically had a differently abled or differently shaped body. So that would include people who are like super small, super big, extra limbs, webbed fingers, extra hairy, any of the different varieties of, like my vocabulary about talking about this is not good. So if anybody wants to correct me, jump right in. But those people were often traveling with the circus and presented either, not as oddities or as circus freaks, which is the general term. And the weird thing about that idea is that it was often plugged into the same box as people who were performing. So you might have, for example, a midget and a strongman, but the strongman is an athlete, but he's presented in the same box category, for example, as an exotic circus freak body, right? Even though it's an ability. And then you also had in that box people who were either transgendered or actual hermaphrodites, which means you have both bits of sexes, which who knows where they were on that spectrum. It could have been all of the above, but also being put into that box of the exotic other. And also in the abilities category here would be people who are doing things like sword swallowing or fire breathing, or laying on a bed of nails, or hammering themselves. And then all of that, when it got revamped in the 90s and became popular again, was often mixed in with body manipulation. Do you guys know that term at all? So body manipulation was the term that was used in the 90s and 2000s for both these circus acts that people are getting back into doing, like sword swallowing, for example, or like hammering a nail into the side of your eye without puncturing your eye, and all kinds of like freak activities that were done as circus acts, but also piercings and tattooing. So tattooed ladies would also go into the circus freak. I see we are tattooed ladies out here. And then also, what was the last thing? Oh, like people who would like hammer themselves with nails on stage also evolved into body manipulation shows that we used to see. They're not so popular anymore, but like live piercing shows, especially in the fetish scene. So like that thread also went along. And so this, I bring up this tangent mostly because I wanted to highlight that idea of differentness being exoticized. So it's both fascinating and exciting and people want to see it, and also puts people into this box where they're sort of untouchable and sort of, well, other, right? So they're not normal. So that kind of brings us to our last question on this poll, and then I have another poll to send you out. So in what context have you seen dances from other non-white Eurocentric cultures? Part of a variety of performances. So that's usually how we present it at Skyline, because I'm usually trying to get everybody on campus to throw some dance in. So there'll be like something from the ballet class and something from the Kababayan program. And so that would be like a variety of different performances from different backgrounds, presented as a specialty performance. Can be the same thing. If you go, this is going to be a terrible little moment here because we may all have participated in this, but like a lot of the time you go to suburban dance studios and they teach ballet, tap, and jazz, but then they're going to like, this semester we're learning hula because I went to Hawaii and I took one class. We've all done something like that. But that would be like a specialty performance. And that is one of those examples where on one hand, at least people are learning about the culture, but they're not learning appropriately or authentically. And it's way better if you can bring a person who actually trained in that dance to come and teach it. Yeah, so that's the goal right now in the dance world. And then the biggest number of you said that most of the non-white Eurocentric culture dances that you've seen have been happening in your community or locally to that community, which means they're being performed by the people who actually learned them and shared them with each other, which is great. But I just want to point out that what does that mean about those dances getting on stage even today, right? There's still a huge discrepancy about what kind of dances we see on a stage, because it's expensive, versus in the community. And I don't know if I have like a value statement about that. It's just interesting to notice that even today, almost 70% of those dances are still in the community. Okay, so, oh, I guess I can share those results so you can see them. Interesting. Sorry, guys. That was my first time doing a poll. And then I have another poll. So let me pull up the other poll. Can I do poll number 2? Can I do poll number 2? Poll number 2. Okay. So I believe that it's pretty clear that these are anonymous answers. Yes, which is cool because you guys can take the poll and then like you could say something that feels embarrassing and I wouldn't have any idea who said what. Hooray, polling. All right, poll number 2.
That previous conversation about like freak shows and how they were viewed, it reminded me a bit of what was talked about in the minstrelsy part of this module, where it said that like people could be impressed by the skill that it took to pull off these like athletic moves, but then because of elements of like exaggeration or clown-like things, they could be impressed by what they were doing without really acknowledging them as equals or people. And I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's definitely what this poll is about. Like, what does it mean to put someone on stage? What does it mean to see someone do something you can't do? And how does that make distance between the viewer and the performer? But also, like, does it change your relationship to each other in different ways? And next week we're gonna get, I think next week is gonna be the emotionally hardest week. So I'm glad that I get to talk to some of you guys in person, because next week we're gonna actually look at blackface stereotypes, and it's gonna be rough. And I'm personally, as a white teacher teaching this for the first time, like totally afraid. Like, I really want your guys' feedback next week, because I was finding materials and really just asking myself, do I need a content warning? Do I, like, I don't, it's traumatic to see some of these images for some people. And on one hand, I want to give you guys an out to like not have to look at it. But on the other hand, we as a nation need to accept what's happened. So I don't know, keep talking to me, please. Like, I am open to all suggestions about how to do this as well as possible. Okay, looks like we have all our votes. Mo, if you watched the orientation, I will answer you. I see your question, but let me stay on topic for the moment. I'll answer you at the end of the hour, because we're running out of time. Okay, so have you ever been told that a dance you're doing is inappropriate, scandalous, or shameful? We have 22% yes, 22% I've said that to other people before, and 56% no. So I wanted to sort of ask a secondary question about that, which you don't have to actually answer, but I'm curious whether most of those yeses were doing dances that were either, I mean, for my experience, the way that I related to this question is I remember being a teenager and being told that like I shouldn't be moving my hips that much because it was too sexual. That was my first experience with that. But obviously, like, I'm not authentically doing anything but white dancing, right? I'm only inauthentically. But I think at that time I was probably doing, I'm gonna date myself here, like the Humpty dance in front of someone, like a teacher. Yeah. So the next question is when you hear the word exotic, do you think of positive or negative attributes?
Positive.
Yeah.
Yep.
Tell me more.
Positive, only because I've gotten that word a lot just based on appearance. My hair, I have extremely curly hair. So it's super wild. I see it as like someone that's out there, interesting, very like sexy, like that. That's how I see it. I don't see it as like vulgar as how people, my mother sees it like that. But I'm explaining to her like it's not how you think it is. It's just it's an appearance. Like it's my hair. It's just it's very out there.
That's really exciting to hear you say that. I feel the same way about the word exotic, but it was interesting to me that you feel that your mother feels differently about it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea why?
I'm not sure why. I come from quite a mixed, background. My dad is from Egypt. My mom is Latina from Nicaragua and Puerto Rican. So how do I say it? Best of both worlds, but I add one more that I don't really, how to say it? I go more towards my like Central American side than I do my Egyptian side. Mm-hmm. And I've it's been quite a ride just because I choose not to go with my Middle Eastern side, just because, you know, my personal. But I think that my mom kind of feels like that because she just kind of puts everything based on like, oh, well, over there it's like that and over here it's like that. But I'm like, but I'm here. Don't compare it to over there.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the ideas that I'm leading us towards in this discussion is the idea that people have used the word exotic in a way that is supposed to be putting people down. And so I wonder if some of your mom's experience might have been in that term, like, oh, you're so exotic, or meaning you're not meeting our imaginary white standards.
Right. But generations have changed, you know, so it's going to keep getting, you know, more and more and more. So that's what I'm saying. So I'm saying it's like completely, I get it. It's very different, like back in my parents, the 50s, 60s, all that. I completely understand that. But times have changed and there's just so many new dances, so many new styles. Everything's going on and on. So it's going to keep growing.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly hope so. Okay. Sort of the same responses for number 3. Oh, wait. I can end and share so you guys can see this with me. I learned something, guys. So sort of the same spread of answers about whether you have been called exotic or been told that you were inappropriate, which is an interesting similarity. And then I'm looking at number 4 right now, which is this question that's a little like, after you hear the word exotic, what does that word compare to? Do you think of white Eurocentric culture as normal? Do you think most white people, or most people consider it to be normal? And what is normal to you? And I think it's really interesting to look at, like 56% of us said that my own normal is not white Eurocentric, but still like 22 and 22% of you guys said that either you think that white is normal in comparison to that, whether that's right or wrong wasn't part of the question, or that you think that most people still think that white is normal. And I love to just have that visual aid for you guys, because I feel like that is a huge part of this conversation we're having nationally about what is white privilege. Because when I talk to people who don't get it yet, that's a big part of why, is because generally speaking, if you are white, unless you've really thought about it, you don't realize that you've always been in this box of the opposite of everyone else, when we're clearly not the majority, right? So thanks for your honest answers there. I love it. And then our last question. After seeing a performance, which of the following ways have you felt towards the performance? And that's like super even. I'm impressed. So our last topic to cover is, I just wanted to touch in for a moment about the Brenda, Dixon, Gottschild article. Was that like a lot? So the question is, you're going to want to use those 5 points when you're looking at dance in our midterm, heads up. And the question I have for you, or like, I want you to ask me questions about, like, were there any of those terms that didn't make sense? No problem, Celia. Have a good day. Did you guys have any questions about those terms? High effect juxtaposition. The aesthetic of cool is pretty much the same as when he was talking about it in culture in general. Yeah, just any of those things that you want me to clarify, because we're going to still be talking about them next week.
What are the 5 points that you are referring to?
So in the Dixon Gottschild article, let me see if I have it up. I think I do.
Because I see only 4 separate sections.
There might be 4. I feel like I always say 5.
Are we counting like polycentrism and polyrhythm as two separate? Okay.
I think that's probably, I think you're right. Let's check. Okay. So here's our article. Embracing the conflict. Polycentrism, polyrhythm, high effect juxtaposition, ephebism. Is that 4?
Then the aesthetic of cool.
And then the aesthetic of cool. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, those 5. So did you have questions about any of those things? Because when we get back to the writing, so next week we'll do a peer review, basically like a study group project where you're going to, I'm going to tell you the questions that are on the midterm 2 weeks from now. And so you're going to make a study sheet and then peer review 3 of your friends' study sheets. So everybody should be like way too ready for this. That's my hope. So those elements are definitely going to be in the writing questions. And what we're going to be doing is, like, the first week we were really talking about how to write about dance to describe it. And this week we're talking about how to sort of how to describe elements of dance that come from a cultural background. So we're gonna, of course, next and in the midterm be putting those 2 ideas together. So I might ask you a question like, pick a dance, talk about a social issue that this performer was going through, show how that dance relates to older dances that came before it, and talk about that in terms of Africanist elements or the idea of the exotic or the other. Those are sort of the question formulas that I'm putting up on. And I will give you like the real questions next week. So like, I want you guys to do well, but generally my idea is I want to give you all the information and be really transparent about what the tests are going to be. And then, but I'm not shying away from the rigor of having you guys do collegiate writing. So all the info is coming. But did you have any questions about any of those 5 elements? Were they not clear?
For me, the high effect juxtaposition and ephebism, those 2 were the ones that I kind of struggled with.
Okay.
Yeah.
So ephebism, meaning it's the Greek word for like youth and vitality. So it's strength, athleticism, flexibility, sort of a lot of the elements that we think about in terms of breakdancing, and eventually we'll see voguing as well. So that's ephebism, is that youthful, crazy wildness. High effect juxtaposition is, because we talked about embracing the conflict already, right? That like two different things can exist at the same time or right next to each other. The high effect juxtaposition, the key word there is the juxtaposition. So I was trying to think of an example of this before we started. In classical Eurocentric art, we always have contrasts. That part's not new. For example, the black swan and the white swan is like, right? Those are opposites that are presented against each other for the sake of dramatic effect. But the juxtaposition is the important part in that element there, which is to say, instead of, first we have the white swan, she's oh so pretty, everybody's gonna fall in love. Then we'll have a transition where we see that the prince gets tricked and we see that the bad guy is gonna turn into the black swan and trick him some more, and then we show you the black swan. So in high effect juxtaposition, you're just smashing those things together. You're either having both things happen at the same time, or there's no transition or explanation in between the 2 things. And another thing that invites is the idea of double entendre. Do you guys know that fancy French word? Mm-hmm. It means double meaning. And we have that all over the place in our world, but it just means that you're using a term that maybe sounds nice or normal, but it has another meaning that everybody kind of winks and nods and understands. For example, an eggplant emoji is a fruit and, right? So a double entendre means that there's that second meeting. It's usually sexual, but it can also be, and we'll talk about this idea more next week too, it can also be a way of winking and nodding to other people who are in your community. Because next week we're going to talk about what happened. We'll talk about white people doing blackface minstrelsy and then how the transition happened when, after the Civil War ended, Black people in America were finally allowed to actually perform on stage. And the way that they could get on stage was by doing these minstrel acts, first in blackface, because that was what people would allow, and how they eventually took that over and then erased it and made it irrelevant because obviously their talents were way better than a bunch of white jerks faking it. So that's kind of next week's topic, and inherent in that is that high effect juxtaposition, because they might be doing exactly the same act as the white minstrel had been doing to be able to get their break, but at the same time their own community can be looking at them and be like, what are you doing? So they have to be able to both perform the stereotype and also at the same time look over at their friends and neighbors and be like, can you believe they fall for this? And that is one of the elements that can happen with high effect juxtaposition, is that you're being ironic at the same time that you're being effective in your performance.
Okay, I gotta go now.
That's cool. I think we're all done.
Yeah, okay.
Anybody else has any other questions?
No, thank you for
Thanks,
today.
guys.
Take care, okay?
Okay, you too. And let me know if you guys have questions. Next week's rigging is going to be emotional, so like check in and talk to me, because I'm sure I'll
Awesome.
mix something up and I need you to tell me.
Awesome. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye!
Real quick, could I go over those 5 points with you?
Yeah, let me answer Mo's question. Mo, are you still here? I see your beautiful hand up with your birdie. I think your question is, on the first orientation, were you there with us live? I'll let you answer that question. The first day, yes. So are you saying that you just didn't get extra credit in that extra credit assignment? Is that the real question? And if you look into that assignment, did I leave you a comment or did I just not grade you at all? Because if I just didn't grade you at all, then I just need to go in and fix it. Okay, I will take a look at that right after this then. Thank you for letting me know. And if you, okay, cool. Yay. All right. Flo, did you want to ask that question?
Okay, yeah. So I just wanted to like summarize the stuff.
Please.
So for polycentrism and polyrhythm, it's more to do with like the actual physical movement, where with polycentrism, there's like there's more than 2 or more points that the movement can come from.
Mm-hmm.
And with polyrhythm, different parts of the body follow different rhythms.
Yes. So they can happen at the same time. So polycentrism, generic, patting your head and rubbing your tummy.
Okay.
Patting your head and rubbing your tummy, right? That would be polycentrism. There's a center of movement happening in one hand and another one happening in another. Thanks, Mohammed. Polyrhythm could be, it usually takes 2 body parts to do, but for example, one part is going slowly and the other part is going fast.
Okay.
Yeah. And that could be like, maybe your hips are doing a slow circle, but your head is going crazy. For example, I took an intensive at the Alvin Ailey School last summer, where I was hoping to be 2 weeks from now. And one of the things we learned was this original piece of choreography, but they like break it down, and you have to use one hand that is quickly unscrewing a jar, and the other hand is like snapping on every 4. And then you have to do a crazy walk all at the same time. So you have like 3 rhythms happening in your body all at once. It's bananas.
That sounds like a challenge.
It was really challenging. We all just laughed at ourselves. Bye, Erica. Bye, Ronak. Thank you. Bye, Ref. Okay, so then we did ephebism, and high effect juxtaposition.
For like, I'm just trying to like categorize them a bit. So like with the first 2, it's kind of like it's like the movement itself, and then with the high effect juxtaposition, is that more to do with like the meaning and the intention of the dance?
It can be, but it can also be movement. So both of those things can apply. So let me think about that. Next week we're going to talk about Bojangles and really look more at tap. So if you think about, remember that Duke University guy showing us buck dancing, and how buck dancing is really like stompy and down, and Bojangles is one of the people that really took that transition. He's one of the first Black performers to perform without blackface. Of course, he had to in the beginning, but he's one of the first ones that stopped. And one of the things about his particular tap style that made him stand out from everybody is that instead of tapping with this really downward, stompy, flat-footed, clogging feeling, which was the style at the time, he started standing upright and putting on a suit, and his feet would move really fast underneath him, and his weight was more on his toes. So he like brought this like coolness or elegance to the dance form, which had previously been really earthy and grounded. And that is those 2 things together, right? His feet are stomping, but on top he looks like, hey, everything's cool. On the bottom, all this effort and super fast athletic stuff is happening, but at the top he's wearing a suit. So that's an example of high effect juxtaposition. Does everybody want to say high effect juxtaposition 5 times fast? I feel like I goof it up every time.
Okay, that helps me understand that.
Did we miss one yet, or did we go over all of them?
I think that was, and then just for ephebism, it's just like another, I don't know, like way of characterizing it, where it's like the movements are strong. And you mentioned youth and vitality, but like, does that just mean the way that they move makes them seem youthful, or like the way they're only able to move that way because they have the athleticism of someone who's young?
Yeah, I think it's about demonstrating athleticism, not so much about like, it's not about naivety, or I'm just reopening this. Oh, here, let me share screen. Oop. So, power, vitality, flexibility, drive, attack, speed, sharpness, force, and intensity. So it's about the body being alive, the body being full of force and athletic energy and vitality, as opposed to when we say the word youth, I think the sort of like a Eurocentric version of youth might include things like innocence, naivety, softness. That's not what ephebism is. Ephebism is like, you can go out there and take on the world and attack and be full of sort of the passion of movement, might be another way to place it.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a great breakdown. I hope people hang out and watch that, because I think that is like super gonna help. Anything else, my dear?
No, that was mainly it. I just wanted to go.
Yay! All right, well, I'll see you next week.
Thank you. I'll see you next week.
Bye.